hello everybody and welcome to this series of videos on public tendering for businesses. My name is Orla Leydon and I'll be looking at a number of different topics when it comes to public tendering for business, whether you're an SME that's privately funded but are looking for some public money, or whether you're a social enterprise and you are predominantly publicly funded but want to improve your success rate in getting some public funding as well. So what are we going to cover over the series of the videos? So we're going to look at a few things. So the first thing really I want to look at is why would we tender for public funds? Because the impression may be that only bigger contracts are given out on public websites, and it might just seem like a lot of work for very little return. So once we look at that, then I want to look at, okay, so now that we've convinced ourselves that actually public tendering is a good thing, where do we go to find these contracts, to find these public services that are looking for businesses such as ourselves to tender? And one of those is e-tenders. So we're going to also be looking at e-tenders. So how do I use it to take away the daunting feeling people have around e-tenders, which is understandable. So I'm going to look at that in detail. So then we see on e-tenders a tender call that we think this could be of interest to us. So how do we respond to it? How do we format our response? And then to finish off, what I want to do is, and I think this is really important, so once you've put in your tender and the deadline is passed, what does the buyer do in order to decide who is the winning supplier? And what can you learn from that process? So they're the main things I want to cover, and hopefully they will be of use to you over the next series of videos. So let's start with the parties involved in public tendering. So we have two parties predominantly. So we have buyers. So these are the public services businesses who are the people looking for you to tender. So I will be referring to them as buyers throughout this video. You are a supplier, I'm a supplier, so that means that you are looking for business from public services. So they're just the two different names I will be talking about, just to clarify what they are. So why is it important to tender for public funds? And a lot of people, as I said earlier, might say that actually public funds contracts go to very, very large businesses and they're way out of our league. So a few things to look at that might change that thought process. Certainly over the last few years, it has become much easier for smaller businesses to tender for public funds. So a few things have been brought in by the department. First of all, what they do now is a lot of public contracts are actually broken into lots. So you have a choice to tender for an aspect of the full contract. You don't have to tender for it all. So that really has made it much easier for smaller businesses to tender. Secondly, you can now collaborate with perhaps another business that might have a complementary skill, and the two of you can tender as a consortium. So that has also helped as well. Other things that have been a barrier to small businesses tendering has been the level of turnover that's been requested. That has now become much more achievable. So what's really important is that buyers must ensure that the financial turnover they request is proportionate to the size of the contract. So that has really made such a difference to small businesses. The same with insurance levels. So now you don't need the insurance level to tender for a contract, you just need to declare you will get the required insurance level. So a lot around self-declaration. And I suppose the final thing I would say is buyers are now being encouraged to actually ask for online submissions. So gone is the day where you had to tender 2 or 3 days in advance of the deadline and include several copies in an envelope and post it. So now it's an instant online submission, which makes it much, much easier for small businesses, and it takes away that cost as well. So that's one reason why it's become much easier for small businesses to tender for public money. Another thing that's important to note is what is the value of money that goes through the public purse? So e-tenders alone, up to 15 billion annually is advertised on e-tenders from Irish public service bodies looking for suppliers to do work. Of that, 53% of them in 2018 was won by small businesses, so SMEs like yourself. And 3/4 of that 53% actually were contracts less than 100 grand, which significantly, a lot of them, a lot less than 100 grand. So I suppose that emphasises the point that it isn't something that's out of our reach, that it is actually achievable. And also another key benefit to tendering for public money is it's a continuous demand. There will always be a need for someone to do work with public service contracts. They have an obligation to pay you promptly, so you know the money's there, you know you will get paid, and actually their target is 15 days, so that really is helpful for small businesses in terms of cash flow. And the last thing I would say, and this is something I see myself, if you tender for public contracts, you tend to have to set up policies and procedures, and that leads to business improvements for you as a business. And it has a huge positive benefit to your business because of that. However, on the other side of the coin, funders would say, the buyers would say that over 50% of the applications they receive from small businesses or from suppliers in general actually never get past the initial stages because they are ineligible. They don't meet the guidelines. It's clear from the submission they haven't probably read the tender document fully. So what I want to do over the next series of videos is to reinforce what you need to be looking for, so that you're not one of this 50 or 60% that ends up not getting past this stage. So that's just really a little bit about why you should be tendering for public money, and hopefully that's made you think again about it. So what do successful tenderers have? And I would say they have three things. First of all, they have a knowledge of public tendering, and hopefully you'll have that after looking at these videos. Secondly, they have the skill to be able to communicate what they do, but also the skill to be able to provide a solution to what the buyer is asking them to do. And that'll become more clearer as we work through the videos. Also, they have creativity is another skill that's required to be able to tender, to be able to really think innovatively, because that's really important in terms of success. And finally, attitude. Having the attitude, well, I'll just maybe tender, it's possibly already gone, will probably reflect in your submission. So I would say if you're going to put the work in, and it does take work, really go in with the view that you're going to get this tender. Because every tender document that lands on a buyer's desk, whether you are successful or not, is a sales communication. So it will leave a view of you with the buyer, whether or not you get it. So just be mindful of that. It is very much you selling yourself. And not forgetting that buyers have to follow EU procurement rules. They have to be fair, they have to be open, and they have to be transparent. So they have to make sure that they follow the guidelines because they are audited on same. So it has to be done in a fair way. So when do buyers have to tender? So to put it into context, I suppose, and what that might mean for you as a small business. So if they have a contract that's worth 5 grand or less, they must seek at least one quote. And for a lot of buyers, they actually look for at least 2. If it's between 5 and 25,000 for a supply or service, not a works project, we're talking about supply and service, they must seek 3 quotes. And if it's over 25, they must actually advertise it on e-tenders. So between 25,000 and under is really important, because it's trying to, okay, how do I get on that quotation list? How am I one of those people? So we'll talk about how you might do that as well. So that's just really looking at the importance of public tendering for you as a business. So where do I go now that I know that this might be something that I need to be doing? Who are my potential clients? So I just said a moment ago that anything under 25 grand, it's direct invitation quotes. So whether that's a 1, 2 or 3 quotes. So you need to get yourself on that list. So you need to build relationships with all of the public service bodies in your local area. So they would be your local enterprise office, your development company, your leader company, the county council, anybody at all that you know. Find out the main people within those organisations and ask to be put on their list. So these umbrella bodies are really important to build a relationship with. They also run panels as well as quotation lists, so get yourself on that panel too, and they may have open calls for that. So that's one way. Another way is ActiveLink is a really important website that some people may be familiar with. That is for not-for-profit organisations. So it covers the community, voluntary and charity sector. So for tenders under 25 grand, you may see a lot of them advertised on that. So register on it, and once a week you will get an alert, and go and find the tenders page and see if there's anything on it that might suit you. So they're for smaller value, we call them smaller value tenders. So that's a couple of things for you to do. A few other things, people are probably familiar with the wheel. So you can register with the wheel funding point. Now it is a cost. It's $200 a month if you're not a member, or a year should I say if you're not a member, and $150 if you are a member of the wheel. But if you can't stretch to that, register with the wheel, because you will on a monthly basis get a newsletter telling you about funding applications. May not have the same level of detail as if you had paid for it, but it's still a useful thing to do. And of course we have Rethink Ireland, who are main funders of social enterprises, so they're more for the social enterprises who are watching this. So keep an eye on their website, keeping an eye on their funding calls as well. And of course networking is massive. Social media is the way people communicate when there's funding coming down the line. And the Department of Rural and Community Development that does a lot of this funding has a Twitter account. The politicians will initially put out a press release before it goes to local providers or local buyers. So for you to follow their Twitter account is really important, because you will hear it firsthand and it will start to get you prepared. And then we have some other trusts and foundations, and this is probably more for the social enterprises that are watching this. So you have the Social Entrepreneurs.ie, Community Foundation, and Ireland Funds. So there's a few more there that are really important for you to be aware of. So they're all possibly for under 25,000, but also for ones that are, maybe even the larger ones might come through some of those websites. So now we get to eTenders. So etenders.gov.ie is the actual website that all buyers must publish contracts over 25, the value of over 25,000. So from my perspective, it's essential that you register on eTenders. So how do you do that as a supplier? So if you go into the eTenders website and you just go onto the first page, there is a supplier registration button that you just click, and it's absolutely instant. So what do you need to register? All you need is your tax number, and if you're a sole trader, it'll be your PPS number. So you put that information in, and you put your own details in, and you instantly become registered. So then what I would suggest is you set up your email alerts based on keywords. So when a buyer advertises a contract on eTenders, they must put in codes. So you need to find the codes that are relevant to you. So if you're a services supplier that perhaps does training, you would put in training, you might put in consultancy, and you find those words. So you're getting the relevant alerts, you're not just getting everything that's advertised. So it is instant. So they are the main places to source funding opportunities. But a few things I would say: be proactive. Don't just wait for your email alerts to happen. Go onto the websites, make it a regular, maybe a weekly thing, every second day thing, and just see what's coming through, because buyers mightn't use the right codes and you might miss it. And search those websites all the time. So you're registered on eTenders. So okay, how do I access these contract notices? How do I know when there's something there that might suit me? So you've set up your email alert, something comes in, you think that looks like it might be interesting. So click on that notice, and once you click on that notice, it will come onto a page. And then you must click an accept button in order for you to be able to download the tender document. So on the left-hand corner you will see that. So often I hear, but I can't download the document, and that's because we haven't clicked on that accept button. So download the tender document, and I would say read it. So important that you read the tender document at this stage. So let's talk about what might be in that tender document generally, and all tender documents might vary, but in general the tender document has 4 different parts. So the first part is instructions. So instruction to you, the tenderer, you, the supplier, and if there's any particular type of contract conditions. So I'm going to go through each of these 4 aspects individually as we progress through the video. Then they'll have specification of requirements. What is it the buyer requires you to do and to submit a solution for to them in your tender? Qualification selection criteria, and I'm going to look at this because this is really important. What do you need to have mandatory in order to tender? And if you don't have this, you should not pursue the tender because you don't meet the qualification requirement. So then the final piece is the award criteria. This indicates how will the buyer decide who wins the contract. So is it cost? Is it a bit of quality with cost? So what are the different ways and how will they score your tender? So they're generally the 4 different aspects of a tender document. So let's talk through a few of these 4 areas and what might be in them. So the first one, as I said, was instruction to tender. So what do you need to be looking for on this document? Deadline. When is the deadline? When is the deadline for your submission? When is the deadline for clarification queries? And generally clarification queries will only be accepted up to a week before the deadline, and actually sometimes it might be 2 weeks. And also remember, submission deadlines might only be 3 weeks, so it's quite short. So get the document downloaded as soon as possible and read it. So what are the clarification deadline? What are the submission deadline? Can I meet it? If I can't meet it, you might need to say, look, at this point, there's no point in me tendering. So another thing on instruction to tender, what's the submission format? Have they given me a template? Do I need to fill in a template? Do I need to develop my own? Are there maximum page numbers? Because if you go over it, they won't look at it. Is there a font size? Do I submit it in email? Do I submit it in hard copy format? So all of those things could be showstoppers if you don't read them and you submit a tender in the wrong format. Another thing in terms of format is, how do I price? So have a good look at that. Do they want an hourly rate? Do they want a daily rate? Do they want a fixed fee for the job? And if it's a supply, do they want delivery separated? Do they want VAT inclusive, VAT exclusive? Do they want the VAT rate, VAT figure? So there's lots of things to really drill down and identify so you're clear. Is there a form of tender document that you must fill in that's unique to the tender document itself, rather than you just sending in your quote? And then the other aspect of instruction to tender could be contract conditions. So they may say they expect someone to start immediately. They must complete it within 2 months. So you have to ask yourself the question, do I have the capacity to do that? Is there something around payment? Maybe they don't pay for 30 days, 60 days. Does that now fit your cash flow? And withholding tax. Is that something they take off you, and is that something that you can actually live with? So they're the things you need to look at and say to yourself, okay, can I meet the requirements of this tender document? So the next section is specification of requirements. So really, really important, and it's all, at the end of the day, the tender document is all about the buyer's needs. And I would say, for me, the specification of requirements is the most important element of the tender document. And what it does is it provides you with a description of the service or goods that they require, and therefore you need to be able to think about, what is my solution, what is my proposal, and what's the best price I can do for this. So specification of requirements, as I said, is the most important part. The buyer will have spent a lot of time developing this, a lot of consultation within the public service body to come up with what their specification of requirements is. So do take it with that in mind, that it needs to be fed back to them in your tender document. So read it, make sure you can meet it, and once you know you can meet it, then progress to the next stage of the tender document. So the third part of the tender document is qualification or selection criteria. So this is what is mandatory. So you either pass or fail on this. Now, you haven't even got to the point of responding yet. You're still trying to decide whether or not you can meet the requirements of the tender document. So what might be a mandatory pass or fail thing that you require? So taxes in order, that is essential for all public service contracts regardless of the size of it. Insurance levels, they may ask you to have a certain level of insurance, so you might need to declare same for that. Track record, they may want you to show 2 jobs of a similar nature, and if they ask you for that, you need to provide it. If you can't, then you possibly are wasting your time tendering. They may ask you for turnover. Generally on a smaller value contract that doesn't get asked for, but make sure that that is not something that's been asked for. You may be asked for qualifications. You may be, if it's a supply, so it's a piece of equipment you're supplying to them, you may be asked for a warranty, you may be asked for a quality mark. So this is all the kind of stuff that's mandatory. So what you have to do is ask yourself, okay, can we meet this? Can we meet this? And if we can't, then you either ask the question through the clarification process, or you don't submit a tender. But I would suggest ask the question to get clarification if there's only an element of it you don't feel you can meet. But don't assume you can tender without having it on your tender document. So that piece is really all about you demonstrating your competency. Competency to be able to deliver it on the project, competency to have the requirements they need. So what I would say, you can set up a toolbox. So all the stuff I just talked about, like you can get your track record, you can start to develop your track record and file it away, because generally most tenders ask for that. You can develop your qualifications, your team, and file it away, get your finances, get your accounts, get whatever it is you require, your insurances, and have them to hand, and set up that toolbox and have it ready so that when you do come to have to tender, it doesn't become something that's an issue that you can't find and you miss the deadline, which I've seen from time to time, and is a shame because it's such an easy thing to deal with. So then the last piece of the tender document is generally contract award criteria. So at this point you have decided, okay, I can meet the selection criteria, I'm able to address the spec, and all of the contract conditions they've discussed is doable for me. So then they will tell you, so how are we going to decide on the winning supplier? So it may be lowest price, which is unlikely if it's a services contract, such as consultancy, training, or something similar. If it's not lowest price, it'll be a mix of price and quality. So what do I mean by that? So quality could be your approach to delivering the contract. So what are your timelines, what are the activities, what are the tasks you'll do to meet their spec? Another quality element could be your team, so the capacity of your team. Your proposed team, what are their qualifications, what are their experience? So that could be another thing they will score, in addition to your cost. If it's a supply, so again, like I said, a piece of equipment, that quality piece is likely to be product suitability. So does the product you are proposing meet their specification? So what they would expect is you to really clarify what that product is. Okay, so what have we done so far? What we've looked at why should we tender for a public contract and the importance of it. We've then looked at, okay, where do I go to source public funding? And then we've looked at e-tenders, which is one of those sources. And what I've just done now is I've looked at a tender document. Typically, what are the different sections of a tender document? So just to finish off this section, what I would say is your tender document needs to bring to life how you will deliver what they require. And just, if you can't explain simply how you will deliver it, you don't understand it, which means they won't understand it, and assume nothing. So in the next video, we're going to look at, now that we know what a tender document includes, we're going to look at each element of it and how do I respond to that element and get the best outcome. And I would say assume nothing when you do your tender.